Hello guys, welcome to a track guide for the TCR around the Nürburgring Nordschleife. In this video we will be driving the NEC layout of the Nürburgring in the Audi Gen2 TCR. This is a rather simple guide. It's meant to learn you how to drive the track and to learn you the basics of the TCR, so don't expect anything too advanced. Going into turn 1, brake between the 150 and the 100 board on the left side of the track and go back to second gear. You can brake quite aggressively in these TCRs, but make sure not to use too much steering input while braking hard, because you will simply go straight. When you get to the end of the braking zone, try to gradually start steering more and more as you are slowly releasing the brakes. On exit, apply the same logic to the throttle application. You can get up to like 50-60% throttle while steering at 90 degrees, but make sure to gradually build up that last 40-50% throttle while straightening out your steering. Once you get a good feeling for this technique, it will really help you keep the tires from overheating, and it will also save fuel in the long run while going faster. Turn 1 is also the entry to the tricky stadium section of the NEC layout of the Nürburgring. After turn 1 follows a long left-hander. It can be beneficial to sacrifice your turn 1 exit slightly to set yourself up as far to the right as possible for turn 2. Unfortunately, there is no clear brake marker for this corner, as it depends a lot on how you exited turn 1, and it's also uphill, so you can't really see where the apex is. Therefore, the only thing that will make you better through this corner is experience. However, there are some tips to help you find your groove for this corner. Approaching the corner, do a small brake tap and keep third or second gear depending on how far to the right of the track you lined up. Then slowly start steering towards the inside curb and gradually apply the throttle. When you see the inside curb, straighten out steering and apply full throttle. Make sure not to fully open up your steering, because the next part of the track that follows is not actually a straight, it's still a small left-hander. What follows this not straight is another tricky left-hander. Except for this one you can actually see the apex, so that is nice. It is important to understand that you must sacrifice your exit from this corner to make sure that you can take the next right-hander as good as flat. Brake when the green-brown AstroTurf line goes over into the stone curbing on the right side of the track. Brake towards the curb on the left and go back to second gear. Really don't be afraid to put the left side tires over the red-white apex curb. Once you're slowed down, gradually apply steering input to turn the car and stay off the throttle. Staying off the throttle makes sure that the car actually turns in, because applying throttle input in these front-wheel drive cars will make you go wide. At the end of the drainage on the curb, start applying throttle and straighten out the car, and aim slightly left of the curb for the next right-hander. Judge your turn into the right-hander by your distance to the white tire barrier on the right side of the track. Lift before hitting the curb. Cut the curb on the right, but make sure not to cut it too much, because it will give you an off-track. And on exit you can also use the green area to the left of the track, but make sure to get most of the car back on track before the end of the green area, because staying wide will also give you an off track. This next corner is a hairpin. For this corner, brake at the 100 meter board and go back to second gear. Start turning in at about the 70 meters and aim for the white line following the apex. This corner dips down after you go beyond the white line, so make sure to apply no more than 25% brake pressure after crossing that white line. You can go slightly wide into this corner, because it could set you up for a better exit. However, take into account that TCRs turn best when you are off the throttle, so only start applying throttle once your car is pointing towards the exit curb and you're starting to straighten out your steering. You can totally ride the curb on exit, but you probably won't need to. For the next left-hander, line up on the right side of the track. I usually try to stay off the green area, but you can use it to open up the entry even more. Brake at the thin white line crossing the track and stay in third gear. Start turning left a bit before the 50 meter board on the right and gently release the brakes while aiming for the apex. When your car is over the apex curb, gradually apply the throttle and open up the steering a bit. However, keep turning left, as you need to line up on the left side of the track for the next corner. The way to approach this right-hander depends a bit on how you took the last corner. If you didn't manage to get all the way to the left of the track, you will have to brake a bit more compared to if you did manage to get all the way to the left of the track. For this corner, apply around 15 to 20% brake pressure while slowly turning towards the apex and staying in third gear. On apex, you can start reapplying the throttle. You can be a bit more aggressive on the exit of this corner compared to most other corners in these TCRs. But still don't go full throttle immediately, because that will just cause you to go straight into the gravel pit. And just like that, we're already at the final combination of corners of the GP track. For this left-right chicane, brake somewhere in the middle between the 50 and 100 meter boards and go back to 4th gear. Slowly start turning in at the 50 meter board and very gently start releasing the brakes. You should be fully off the brakes at the first apex, so the left-hander. From this apex, gently start applying the throttle again, not going full throttle until after the second apex, so the right-hand curb. Here we are, the entry to the famous Nordschleife. Unfortunately, there's no clear brake marker for this corner. You can judge where you need to brake based on the wideness of the pit entry line on the right side of the track. Brake in as straight a line as possible, go back to 2nd gear and turn in after crossing the white line going across the track. Because of the elevation change, make sure to apply only a very little brake pressure through this left-hander. Start applying throttle again when you can see the triangular sign in the distance at the Ringmeister pit exit. And only apply full throttle when you are over the bump, as to not be pushed wide into the wall by the front-wheel drive. And now this is the moment we've all been waiting for. The first corner of the real Nordschleife track. Brake at the orange barrier on the right side of the track and keep or go back to 2nd gear depending on how much speed you got through the entry of the Nordschleife. Turn in a little bit before the left pit exit line disappears. Hold on a small bit of brake pressure into the corner. After the dip at the apex, you can start reapplying the throttle. You can absolutely abuse the exit curb on the right, as these TCRs are very good over the curves and this curb is quite kind to the car. Although with this line you probably don't need the exit curb. This next right-hander is flat. What follows now is a combination of corners that is quite tricky and very flowing. It's not really separate corners, and each apex for the next corner really depends on how you took the corner before that. So for the next corner of this tricky section, start braking just after the white graffiti and go back to 4th gear. Lift off the brakes for the left-hander and then brake again and go back to 3rd gear before slowly releasing the brakes while turning into the right-hander. Around the white graffiti in the right-hander, you can start reapplying the throttle. The following left-hander is a tiny lift. Then do a short brake action and go back to 3rd gear before turning into the right-hander. Don't be afraid to cut this curb and apply a little bit of throttle to keep the stability in the car. At the end of the curb, apply the brakes, release the brakes before turning left and do not cut this left-hander. After you land from the small jump over the bump in the track, start applying throttle and you can wash out over the exit curb on the right. Keep turning left after exiting the corner to line up for the next right-hander. For this next corner, brake at the end of the white graffiti and keep 3rd gear. Turn in just before the red-white curb on the right. Cut the right side curb and start accelerating while still on the curb. You can cut the next left-hander, but this won't gain much time and it can really easily unsettle the car or even give an off-track. For Flugplatz, just do a small lift while turning in and then go flat again after the apex. For Schwedenkreuz, the next left-hander, lift to about 40% throttle and start turning in at the 5 km board on the right side of the track. For Adenberg, the long right-hander, start braking just before the end of the red and white curbing on the left of the track and go back to 3rd gear. For this braking zone, you need to brake quite hard, so keep your steering as straight as possible while applying around 80 to 90% peak brake pressure. At the grey gravel on the right side of the track, slowly start steering while you gently release the brakes. Maintain a little bit of brake pressure into the corner if you feel that you need to. When the end of the fence on the outside of the track is straight ahead of you, start gradually applying the throttle again, and aim to reach max throttle around when you would hit the outside curb. For Foxhole, you can keep the car flat. For the next combination of corners, brake at the whiteboard on the right side of the track and start turning left, aiming just to the right of the wall on the left side of the track. Lift off the brakes, but stay in 6th gear while going over the left-hand curb. After the car lands and is settled down, brake again and go down to 3rd gear, hugging the curb on the right. Just before the black Falcon board on the right, you can reapply the throttle, but make sure to stay in 3rd gear. At the zebra crossing, reapply the brakes and in a straight line and go down to 2nd gear. Turn in somewhat late for this next corner to try to get a better line for the right-hander. Apply a bit of throttle, but lift again for the right-hander because otherwise you'll just go wide. Avoid the inside curb, and when your car is pointing towards the start of the red and white curb on exit, start gently reapplying the throttle and completely demolish the exit curb. For this left-hand kink, lift to about 20% throttle and do a very small brake tap if necessary. And at the end of the inside curb, you can apply throttle again. At the end of the stone runoff on the right side of the track, start braking for the next left-hander and go back to 3rd gear. Turn in at the start of the curb on the left, at a weird sharp angle in the curb on the left, reapply the throttle. Don't hit the curb on the right as it will push you wide and unsettle the car. For the next 180 degree right-hander, brake at the 3rd white board on the left side of the track and go down to 3rd gear and really coast through the corner. So try to not hold either throttle or brake. Slowly start reapplying the throttle once you can see the exit curb and really use that curb on exit. The next left-right chicane is flat if you take the right line. Line up all the way on the right of the track and gently start turning in towards the curb, aiming for the dip next to the curb. This dip will help you rotate the car and the right-hander is easy flat. For the next corner, after going over the bump, start gently braking for the miss-hit-miss. Really listen to the name of this corner as you want to miss the first apex, hit the second apex and then miss the third apex. Trail braking into this corner is quite tricky, so alternatively you can brake in a straight line about 10 meters before the start of the curb on the right at the start of the corner, going down to 4th gear, and then you can use the throttle to balance the car through miss-hit-miss. Just like miss-hit-miss, the next combination of corners is downhill braking, so keep in mind that your brakes will be less effective than you're used to. Brake at the sand patch on the left of the track. Gently lift off the brakes while turning towards the first apex on the right and go down to 3rd gear. After passing that apex, reapply the brakes and go down to 2nd gear. Fully lift off the brakes gently while turning hard left at the second apex of the left-hander. Start applying throttle again, but stay off full throttle until you have straightened out your steering. Immediately after straightening out your steering, turn right, but do it gently. Try to steer just enough as to not induce understeer, which should be around 45 degrees steering input. For this next left-hander, brake at the end of the red and white curb on the right of the track and slowly start turning in at the end of the asphalt patch. Go down to 3rd gear while gently releasing the brakes and start reapplying throttle at the apex of corner. For this next uphill right-hander, it is uphill braking, so your brakes will be more effective than you're used to and you might not even have to brake that much. At the end of the escape road on the right, start braking and keep 3rd gear. Turn in at the end of the red and white curb on the left and coast towards the apex on the right. After landing from the bump or the dip in the road just before the apex, start gently reapplying the throttle. Also here, only go on full throttle once your steering is almost straight. Alright, only one more corner before we get a well-deserved rest. For this right-hander, brake in the middle between the red whiteboard and the blackboard on the right. Brake hard and in a straight line back to third gear. At the big white graffiti on the track, start gently releasing the brakes and turning in. You can either coast or carry a very small amount of brake pressure through the corner if you're not slowed down enough yet. When the car is porting straight at the start of the exit curb, start gradually reapplying throttle. Try not to use the exit curb because this will cause the car to drift wide, and once you're on the grass, the corner still keeps going, so you'll probably get an off track and maybe even hit the wall. Now we've survived the first half of the Nürburgring. Enjoy a nice 20-second rest to the next corner. For Mutkurve, lift to 50% throttle at the middle of the stone curbing on the right side of the track. And start turning in. At the apex, you can start reapplying the throttle, once again gently going up to full throttle. The right kink after Mutkurve should be flat. This corner that follows is a long right-hander. Line up on the middle of the track and brake at the yellow graffiti on the road. Go down to second gear and really try to hug the curb without touching it. At the orange barrier on the right, you can start reapplying the throttle, once again not going full throttle until your wheel is straight. Now we get to probably one of the trickiest corners on the track, the Karussell. Brake at the second kink in the red and white curb on the right and go down to second gear. Aim to enter the carousel between the second and third asphalt patch. Keep a bit of brake pressure into the corner as to not fly out of the carousel. Once slowed down, try to maintain around 90 to 100 kph or 60 miles per hour while gently pressing the throttle. Start increasing your throttle input when you see the pink-white graffiti on the barrier on the outside of the carousel. Aim to exit the carousel just right of the top right corner of the last asphalt patch. For the next left-hander, do a small brake at the start of the red and white curb on the right. Keep fifth gear for stability and apply a little bit of throttle through the left-hander. At the end of the red and white curb on the left, start turning right and lift to about 30% throttle while going back to fourth gear. Don't use brakes for this right-hander, as it's not necessary to slow down the car. Use the curb on the left to open up the corner for the next right-hander. Brake at the start of the white graffiti and go back to third gear. You can start reapplying throttle on apex. Here you can use the curb on exit to line up for the next combination of corners, because you need to be on the left side of the track. What follows is probably the trickiest section of the entire Nordschleife. It is very flowing, and that makes it so that you pretty much don't have to use the brakes. And you have to really balance between throttle and brake input. For this next right-hander, do a small lift, brake for the left-hander and go back to fourth gear. Avoid the first apex curb on the left and apply some throttle after passing that apex. Keep around 60-70% throttle through the second apex on the left and then into the right-hander. And after the apex on the right-hander, go full throttle again. You can drift out to the left side of the track, but be careful not to get an off track, because that curb can really easily give one. The following right-hander is especially tricky because it is off camber, meaning that your car will understeer even more than you're used to. For this right-hander, brake just after the dip in the track and go back to fourth gear. Get back on throttle on apex. You can go quite wide out of this corner as there's a pretty good runoff area, but watch for the off track, but it's really easy to get one here. For the left-hander after, brake at the blackboard on the right side of the track and keep fourth gear. For Brünnchen, brake at the end of the flat stone curb on the left and go back to third gear while trailing the brakes into the corner. Get back on throttle after passing the blue and yellow graffiti. You can use the exit curb, but once again, be aware of the off track. For the right-hander after Brünnchen, brake at the end of the red and white curb on the left and go back to 3rd gear. Use all of the exit curve you need, but make sure to get back on the track before the end of the curb because you will get an off track again. For Ex-Mühle, it's uphill braking into a left-hand corner. Brake when the track starts going stronger uphill and go back to 3rd gear. You can use the exit curb for rotation to the right, but make sure not to go on throttle too early because you will even get a slowdown if you cut the curb too much. For this fast double right-hander, brake after the car lands from the jump and go back to 4th gear. Gently get back on the throttle after the first apex of the double right-hander. The section after is completely flat with the right line. Okay, just a few more corners before the end of the tricky Nordschleife. What follows now is a very tricky right-left combination where the car can start to feel pretty light, so you need good car control or just brake a little bit more. For the right-hander, brake at the higher fence on the right side of the track and go back to 5th gear. While going through the right-hander, make sure to keep a bit of throttle pressure to stabilize the car. Once through the right-hander, brake again at the end of the high fence on the right side and start turning left. Go back to 3rd gear, accelerate out of the corner and ride the exit curb all the way to the next corner, the small carousel. For the small carousel, brake just before the start of the red and white curb on the left and go back to 3rd gear. Turn in at the end of the red and white curb on the right and go as close to the red-white curb on apex as you dare because this gives you the best rotation. Exit the corner between the thin asphalt patch and the end of the white asphalt patch. Alright, only one more corner left before the Hedwigshöhe. For this corner, do a small brake tap and turn in just before the end of the red and white curb on the left. Get back on throttle after the apex of the right-hander and line up on the left side of the track. Lift to about 50% throttle as you're going over the top of the hill. Start reapplying the throttle so that you're on full throttle at the start of the red and white curb on apex. Now enjoy the nice 40 seconds of rest that Hedwigshöhe offers. For the final chicane, brake at the end of the red and white curb on the right. You can start quite aggressively here. Go back to 4th gear before turning left and slightly release the brakes to allow the car to turn. When you pass the orange barrier, get back to hard braking and go down to 2nd gear. Absolutely massacre the curb of the right-hander and get back on the throttle while going over the curb. If you notice you go wide on exit, try to get on throttle slightly later out of the right-hander. Now all that follows is a short 10-second run to the start-finish line. I hope this track guide was useful. Thank you for watching and goodbye.